Joni Wickham, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, Johnny, I'm super excited to speak to you because I have been reading this book, The Thin Line Between Cupcake and Beach. And first of all, the title is very catchy. Like I browse around Amazon, and as soon as I saw the title, I had to stop, and then read the bio and what is it about. And so you were very good. Congratulations to whoever came up with that title, whether it's you or your editor, I don't know, but whoever did, that was great. And I see it mostly as a book on female leadership. So I have so many questions for you in that respect. I wonder if we could start this conversation by you telling us a little bit about yourself, but mostly I know that you grew up in a tobacco field and you come from very poor family. So mostly a day in the life of Johnny when you were playing around in those tobacco fields, maybe with pigs and chickens. I don't know what else going on in there, but just give us a glimpse of your life in your early years.
Sure. So when I was growing up, you're absolutely right. I grew up in the middle of a tobacco field in rural eastern North Carolina, and my mother was practically a child herself when she gave birth to me, and because of that. I really had an experience where I was raised a lot by my grandparents. My mom, to her credit, stayed in high school. She worked um, a couple of different jobs to make sure that I had access to quality preschool so that I could have a better start than she did. And so hopefully that would carry me into just a different type of life than what she had experienced at that point. And so I really had the opportunity to learn a lot about life and a lot about how government and political institutions in particular can shape people's lives for the better or the worse. And so just growing up, we didn't have a lot of resources to do things that I'm blessed to be able to provide to my child these days. I wasn't really able to do a lot of like dance classes and camps and things like that. So I had to kind of entertain myself with whatever I can find around me. You're right, whether it be pigs or, or in my case, a lot of hunting dogs. We had like 13, 14 hunting dogs at once from time to time. And just being able to learn about the world around me through the land, on tobacco farms, cotton farms, what have you. Even though I didn't have a lot of material items, I had a lot of love, and I had people around me who cared for me, and who really had an impact on teaching me things that are really important in entrepreneurship, like hard work and resiliency and dedication.
So I just want to point out that your mother was only 15 when you were born, and this is a huge challenge. Like you said, she was just a child. We see a 15-year-old girl, and we cannot think that that could be a mother. And of course, 300 years ago, that was the norm. So it must have been very challenging for her and your grandparents to live in this dynamic. In addition to that, there were not a lot of education in your family. You open up in your book in page 13 when what is it? Your cousin asks you, when are you going to go to stop going to school and start working like everybody else, like any other normal individual in your society? So can you tell us also about the educational challenges and how is it or why is it that for you it was something important while nobody else seems to give that much importance to education? Everybody else wanted to work in the hamburger place, or I don't know what is it that make you realize that education was important for you?
Right, that's a really good question. I give a lot of credit to my mom for emphasizing the fact that education is such a key to everything else in life. If you have access to a quality education, you're much more likely to have access to healthcare in the United States. You're much more likely to have a job that allows you a lifestyle where you can provide for your family and not be in poverty, that sort of thing. And so that expectation from my mother very early on that I was going to go to college, there was not another option for me, even though everyone else in my family didn't necessarily share that worldview, that was really important. And then my grandparents also, even though they only had elementary educations, were very supportive of the fact that I should lean into my education and do whatever it took to make sure that the life that I lived was very different from theirs, where they had to work very hard just to put a roof over their head.
Yeah, but what about you? I mean, those were your mother's expectations of you.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, all your friends are partying, all of your friends are already having that minimal job that allows them to, buy their beer or their joint if they smoke or whatever. So you had to make that decision on your own. Even though that was your mother's expectation, it was finally up to you to make that decision. So, and nobody else in your family, your cousins didn't certainly follow those steps. So what was it about you that told you, okay, I have to follow this route? I want something better for myself. I don't want to be flipping burgers for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I think it was probably my experience navigating um, generational poverty and generational undereducation, and seeing how policymakers had the opportunity to help people experience those concepts very differently. And I decided that I wanted to have a seat at that decision making table. I wanted to figure out how to be involved in government and politics. And the only way, I did not come from a well-connected political family, obviously. So the only way for me to do that was to work very hard and to get an education and to figure out how to earn my seat at the table. So I think that was the driving force, was that I knew that politics and government could help or hinder people trying to create a better life for themselves and their families. And the only way for me to do that was to work hard, get an education, and earn that seat at the table to have my voice heard in those decision-making conversations.
Right. Okay. And now you are a trailblazer. You are a woman in leadership, and other girls can see you, Joni, as the person who was involved in politics, who have now her own business. But at that time, you didn't have that person to look up to. So what is it that make you believe that you were able to do? Because one thing is, like, many kids, they want to be an astronaut, they want to be a cowboy, they want to be whatever. But once they stop playing around, they go back to reality. You had to have something that make you believe that not only you wanted to do that, but it was possible.
Right. One of the concepts I talk about in the book is imposter syndrome. And this
Right.
is something that men and women both can suffer from. Women tend to have greater imposter syndrome a lot of times because of social norms and expectations that are put on them. I certainly had and continue to have a healthy or unhealthy dose of imposter syndrome. At the same time, though, those lessons that were taught to be by my grandparents about resiliency, about hard work, and also bravery, and how important it is to be brave in tackling new challenges. Throughout my career path and my personal journey, those things often, I think, helped me overcome any imposter syndrome that I experienced. And when Mayor James asked me in 2014 to take over as chief of staff, initially I thought of every reason in the world that I wouldn't be able to succeed. I just had a baby. I wasn't an attorney, all of these things. And then when he and I decided to start our own consulting firm and be entrepreneurs, again, I thought of every reason in the universe that I wasn't going to be a good business partner. I never considered entrepreneurship. I don't know anything about running a business, but then I kind of like set myself to think, I know that if I work hard enough and if I concentrate on being resilient when things inevitably go wrong, because that's part of life, that I'd be able to figure it out along the way.
Right. My ex-wife used to tell me that she was trained to be a people pleaser. or to be nice and to be polite and to never step on any other's foot, and not to take too much space. The title of your book is The Thin Line Between Cupcake and Beach. So can you give us an idea how uh, uh, a woman can dance around that line, how to be, nice, but also not to be taken advantage of, or to get some respect. I cannot even imagine the kind of difficulty that a woman have to go through her life to be nice, but also not to be taken advantage of.
Right. The reason that I wanted to stick with this title, and trust me, so many people try to get me to change the title of the book. They thought it would be off-putting. They thought it would turn people off, that sort of thing. I had one experience in particular when I was serving as chief of staff to the mayor. I went into this room. It was a negotiation on a big development project in Kansas City. I was the only woman in the room, and probably the only person under the age of 50 in the room. And when I left, two gentlemen asked me if they could talk to me for a few minutes. One guy told me that I had been way too nice to everyone in the room. And the other guy told me that I had been way too bitchy to everybody in the room.
Wow.
And that was the moment that I thought, this is a thing. And I really think men and women alike need to have a conversation about what it means when women are perceived to be too nice and too bitchy. So my idea for this book is that we should actually widen that thin line between cupcake and bitch, and understand when it's most acceptable to be the cupcake, when it's most acceptable to be the bitch, because there are times when every room, every negotiation needs that bitch mode. And I don't think there's anything wrong with either one of them. It's figuring out and having some self-awareness to understand when each mode is more effective in getting the results that you need for the situation.
Wow, yes. I have read stories that, let's say a man is negotiating for his salary, okay? And he negotiates hard, and, he brings out all these attributes and how he can contribute, and he finally gets the salary that he wants, okay? Then now he's perceived as a good negotiator. But if the same situation applies to a woman and she fights for herself and she showcases all her attributes and she gets what she wants, she is considered a bitch. And she is, even if she gets what she wants, she's resented. People feel resentful because she won on that negotiation. And that must be tough. I mean, you work in politics all the time. There must be many times in which you were right and people accepted your point of view, but I also guess there was some of that resentment when you were proven to be right. Can you more or less, I don't know, showcase one of those experiences where you, like this place where you were in a place, you were the only woman and you were expressing your opinion, and one person called you a cupcake and the other one a bitch?
Yeah, that's definitely one example. And I also remember times if we were negotiating a deal, or if I was in a contentious discussion about a policy issue, and if it was perceived that I got my way, people assumed it was only because I worked for the mayor. Like, I could never have accomplished that on my own. It was his bully pulpit and his power that helped me be effective. So that was an interesting dynamic to have to work through.
How does it feel to be the only woman in the room?
I am much more comfortable now than I was probably 10, 15 years ago. And that's just what experience and building your confidence does for you. I tend to now, I feel like I have the ability and gravitas, if you will, to call out those situations where I'm the only woman in the room. So I'm not as uncomfortable now, but I think I try and use my voice to shine a light on those situations when they do happen.
Okay, so there are many situations in which there is the only Black person in the room, the only gay person in the room, the only I don't know, person of different ethnicity or religious belief in the room. How can a person kind of mm, deal with that? How can they still feel, I mean, I don't think they will feel comfortable, but survive that situation?
Yeah, it's definitely an emotional toll that that sort of dynamic takes on people. And I write in the book about how one tactic that I always used when I was the only woman in the room was to make sure I was almost over prepared for whatever situation that I was that I was walking into, so that when I'm in that environment, I'm the only woman in the room, I'm surrounded by men who oftentimes were given off body language or cues that they didn't think I had an idea what I was talking about. If I walked into those situations over prepared for the substance of the issue, whatever that issue was, I had greater bandwidth in that moment to regulate my own emotions and even help regulate the emotions of other people in the room, whether they realize that's what I was doing or not.
Yeah, I mean, and good for you in a professional way. The thing about it is that it has a big price, because while the other men in the room were probably with their family and watching TV, you were probably in your office, and your husband or kids, they were in the other room, and you were over preparing. And if you had to go through life, you know, day in, meeting after meeting, it is a heavy price that you have to pay in order to be at the same level as everybody else.
You're exactly right. And another concept on that note that I write about in the book is how important it is for all of us to make sure that we include diverse perspectives and include people in our network who don't look like us, who don't think like us. Because I think when we all have greater access to different perspectives, and we open up our eyes and our network to different types of people, it makes those dynamics a lot easier to deal with.
Okay, wow. So, Johnny, can you just tell us a little bit more about your life? So, you were studying, you were coming from your tobacco field to getting graduating. How do you finally get into politics? And tell us a little bit about the struggles and victories that you went through until you finally decided to call it quits.
Yeah. So I went to a tiny all women's college in Raleigh, North Carolina called Meredith College. And that was the point, I really point to that, those years as a turning point for me. It was really the first time that I felt confident in my own abilities and skills. I felt like I kind of found my own voice through that experience of being in an all women's college. And my very first year in college, I had an internship at a small town newspaper. And I was covering this city council meeting. There were 7 older white gentlemen sitting at this table. They had a real budget issue, and they were trying to trim $800,000 from their municipal budget. And back then, that was a huge amount of money for a small town. And they decided to cut what they called the WICE program. It ended up to be Women, Infant, and Children program, which is a funding stream to help low-income women take care of their families. And that was a program that my mother and I, earlier in my childhood, had to access to get by. And so I was the only one in the room who even knew what that program was. It was really, it really struck me that because of who was at the decision-making table, they didn't have that perspective to understand the impact of that program. So I went back to my advisor, and I was just so upset that this happened. And my editor had told me, yeah, that kind of sucks, but your role in the system as a reporter is to write about the decisions after they're made. That just didn't sit well with me. I am too impatient and results driven for my role in that system to be writing about decisions after they're made. So I decided to major in political studies and go to work in politics and just work really hard and earn the respect of people who felt confident in putting me in those seats at the decision-making table.
Wow. Okay. So you earn your place at the table. Can you tell us a little bit about the dynamics? Now you are in politics. You are in the big city. How did it play out every time you went back home? And your cousins who didn't still finish high school, I don't know if they finished or not, but who, they have cut their future short by not following higher education.
Yeah, there's definitely an interesting dynamic there. There's some resentment. I'm not sure that a lot of my extended family understand or even care where my life has taken me and what I've been doing in my career. So yeah, it's definitely, it's an interesting dynamic for sure. I write in my book about how oftentimes when I go home and I'm out with my extended family, we'll get together for breakfast or something, and people just kind of look at me when the waitress or waiter brings the bill, because the assumption is if I went to college, I must be rich.
Right.
So yeah, it's just those types of things make for
Okay.
very interesting family get-togethers.
Okay. So my podcast is mostly about entrepreneurship, and many entrepreneurs suffer from the impostor syndrome that you spoke about a minute ago. Can you give us some tips on how to overcome this impostor syndrome?
Sure. Um, One thing I spoke of earlier, I cannot emphasize enough preparing for whatever you're dealing with. If it's a business deal, if it's a interview, if you're putting a proposal in front of an angel investor, making sure that you've prepared on the substance ahead of time builds your confidence so that you feel better about the situation. And when you are more confident, your body language exudes confidence, so that the other people in the room, even though you might be sweating bullets inside, you're less likely to convey those types of feelings with your body language if you've done the hard work of preparing on the substance.
Wow. Okay. So now, after your years of politics, first of all, how did it come to the end? And then what is it that you are doing right now? And also, uh, how do you come to the decision to write a book?
So Mayor James, the mayor that I served as chief of staff to, was term limited on August 1st, 2019. So he could not seek reelection. Probably a year before that, we both started thinking about what was next for us. I've been in politics and government for a long time. And all he ever wanted to do was be mayor of his town. He did not have further political aspirations. And he and I work very well together. We're very different people. He is an older Black gentleman who was born and raised in urban Kansas City, Marine, attorney. I am not older or Black, and was born and raised in the tobacco fields of Eastern North Carolina. I did not go to law school. I don't have that background. I've been in political communications for 20 years. So we are very different, but at the same time, we share common values and a worldview. And we have found that our skill set, even though they're very different, are actually very complementary. I think that's why we were able to win 16 elections in 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why I have all these wrinkles and gray hair. So we decided to launch our consulting firm last August. We've not quite been in business for a year. It's called Wickham James Strategies and Solutions. And we have several different services that we provide our clients, including strategic communications, public policy, government relations. We do a little bit of political consulting. Mayor James is a very accomplished mediator, so we do mediations as well. And then we do public speaking engagements, and then we have our books.
And who are your clients?
We have a wide variety of clients, thankfully. We do work for corporations, foundations, some nonprofit clients. And then we also look to do some political consulting work with political candidates and ballot measures.
And would you say that your reputation as a hardworking duo was the thing, because it feels like you hit the ground running, that you open your doors and you already have a clientele. So it's must been that you had a great network and a great reputation. And for that, you already have business going.
Yeah, we have been extremely busy from day one. I'm so grateful and humbled by that. I do think our reputation precedes us. We had become known across the country and across the globe in some circumstances for being very focused on results. And so it's been fun to be able to translate that reputation into the private sector and our client work now.
Okay, so as far as I know, life in politics is quite busy. I mean, you have to be on alert 24 hours a day, and you are a public figure. How do you manage to write a book? And do you know how to write? I mean, I think in your book you mentioned you wrote speeches, but one thing is to write a 500-word speech, and the other thing is to write a 200-page book.
Right. Yeah. The interesting thing about this particular book is that so much of it was based on my lived experience. So I had it all up here in my head. It was just a matter of translating it into paper. And so many of these leadership and communication lessons were part of my lived experience too, and was part of my public speaking profile as well. So that was also components that I just had in my head. I had to get it on paper. And so I started writing this book last fall. And as I mentioned, our consulting business has just been very busy since day one. And so I would just get up at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning and write as long as I could before I had to get my daughter up for school. I looking back, it's one of those things that I have no idea how I did it, but in the moment, you don't have a choice. If you're going to get it done, you have to do whatever it takes. And so that's what I did. I'm so proud of this book. I can't believe the reaction. And I'm really glad I did it. I have no idea how I pulled this off while also running a new business in the middle of a global pandemic.
Wow. Well, it comes across the pages that you are a great leader. So let me ask you, if you were going to give a piece of advice to a 15-year-old little girl in regards to leadership, what would you say to her?
I would say to focus on your leadership vision. Don't feel like you have to be someone else. Oftentimes, I think it's easy to see other leadership styles and to witness other leadership visions and feel like you have to take those on as your own. I think when you lead with your heart and soul, and when you lead from a place where you're focused on issues that are important to you, it comes across as more authentic, and it's going to be more of an enjoyable experience. So my advice would be to do some soul searching on your own leadership style and leadership vision, and to be resilient and to be dedicated and honest in your relationships, and everything else will just fall into place.
Wow. And one last follow-up question. And this one is for everyone, how does one learn to be resilient? Because, like one thing is to think, oh, I have to be resilient. But when you are in the midst of any situation, either school, work, relationship, whatever, and you feel like the whole world is stuck against you, that little voice that you have to be resilient is really back there in the background. Is very weak when you are facing all kind of difficulties. So how can we bring and amplify that voice of resilience and bring it to the foreground of our life again?
That's a good question. I think resiliency is something that we can build. I don't think we are born with all the resiliency we're ever going to have. So that's the first thing. If for your viewers and listeners out there who don't see themselves as particularly resilient, that doesn't mean that you can't work on that skill and grow your resiliency. And I think the biggest step to building resiliency is whatever you're going through. If it doesn't go perfectly, try to take the personal aspect of it out of the equation. I can remember when I was trying to get a bill passed in the legislature, it didn't get passed, and I just felt like I had failed the world. And I had a mentor who really urged me to take my own personal feelings of failure out of it and focus much more on the logistical parts that went into that situation. So I would encourage folks to, when you're going through a situation that doesn't work out quite the way you planned or quite the way you wanted it, try your best to take your personal emotions out of it and focus on the logistics that went into whatever situation that was, and focusing on those mechanics rather than the personal emotions of it.
Wow, that's such an amazing. I'm gonna take that piece of advice to heart. Okay, so the last question, Joni, tell us one more time the title of your book. Where can readers find it, and your website, your business? So give us all this marketing stuff information.
Of course, and thank you for that opportunity. The book is The Thin Line Between Cupcake and Bitch, and you're welcome to check out our website, www.wickhamjames.com, and you can learn more about me, my business partner, Mayor Sly James, the work that we do, and you can also learn about our books and purchase the books at that website.
Yeah, one thing that as I saw you pictures of you, both of you together, of course you mentioned all these differences. He's black, you're white, but the other thing is that he is huge and you're petite. So
True, that is true.
they looks like I mean, yeah, putting aside the background experiences, the physical differences are so dramatic as well. So anyway, congratulations. And thank you so much for spending this time with our listeners.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.